like I mentioned before, I have two that I'm going to be working on. I have this one, which I'm going to use a fabric cover for. Actually, I'm going to use a paper cover for. This one I'm going to use a fabric cover for. So we're going to talk about how to do that. Before we get into making your cover itself though, if you have any weird little edges, like fluffy edges or anything like that, you'll want to sand those just a little bit. You don't need to make them completely solid. You also want to avoid making them rounded, right? Unevenly rounded, because that will show through whatever you put on top of them. Just a little bit of sandpaper will help with that. And then the next thing you'll want to do is pick your fabric and your interior paper, right? So your end page, okay? So what I mean by that is, just to give you an idea of how that end page will show up, an end page will look like this, okay? Or it can look like, there we go, this. I would encourage you to avoid the kind of collage effect here. You don't have to have an end page if you don't want to. You could just have it end with one of these, but you want to check your roll to make sure that that actually would happen, okay? So for instance, this one, you can kind of see the line. This is how it's glued on, just that little bit, okay? I'm also going to pick out a ribbon, because remember, one of them needs a closure. I'm going to do the closure in my paper book, so we'll look at ribbon in just a second. But you want to have all of those materials with you before you start. I am in a situation where my fabric is the size I need it to be, right? So it's about 1/4 of an inch on either side, right? You can kind of see that, literally 1/4 of an inch using the board. So I'm just going to need to cut this another 1/4 of an inch off the edge. So roughly, I'm going to give it a little bit more because this one is uneven. This edge is kind of slanted, right? So I'm going to do, maybe not that much. Make sure that you're not stretching your fabric when you do this. Any guesses why?
Because it'll shrink back down.
Exactly, it's going to shrink back down. You want it at like the rested version of itself, just to make sure that it fully covers everything it needs to. And then you can either use a rotary cutter for this, or you can use scissors, follow your heart. If you use scissors for the fabric specifically, choose a Sharpie that's close to the fabric color. It might show up a little bit, and then try not to draw way out into the middle, okay? I'm going to trim off this little excess because that will be a pain to work with. There we go. I'm not as distressed about these little tearaways. I'm just going to trim those with a scissor. You can kind of hide those if you want to, but it's ideal to just go ahead and do that cover. And there are a lot of different ways to proceed. My personal preference is to glue onto your exterior first. So get your cover figured out first. You might want to erase any writing you have on. I'm using this really thick paper for my cover paper or my end paper, so I'm not too worried about the writing. It's not going to show through. But very similar to what we did for your altered book project, you're just going to cut a little curve into that edge. You can draw that out if you want to, and in fact I will, because it's best practice to do it that way. It doesn't have to be precise, but you do want it to have, again, that curve to it. I'm gonna cut inside of that line, cause I do want a little bit of space here, like this, right? I'm gonna do the top two, and then I'm gonna check and make sure they're correct. You just wanna practice fold them over. And make sure they meet in that center. I'm not worried about it meeting on that center, right? Let's see about this one. Yeah. So you should have a kind of creased fold like that, no little gaps. I did this one poorly so that you would see what those gaps look like. They'll look like this, okay? So you wanna make sure you give yourself a little bit extra. It's easier to cut away than it is to add it back in. This one I'm gonna do a little less of a cut. There we go. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and show you, for the sake of time, how to do your ribbon. So we're gonna pick kind of a random ribbon for mine. I like this purple. So, what I'm gonna do is, if I wanted it to tie kind of like this, where there's two on either side, and we can tie it in a bow if we wanted to, then you want to do about 3 to 4 times the length of the book itself. 3.5 is a really good place to end up. It doesn't have to be super precise. What am I? 3 1/4 of these, so we'll do 8. We'll do 8. 8 should be fine. Actually, let's do 9. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. More or less. Having excess is not gonna hurt you in this case, but try not to be wasteful. Okay. So what you would do in this scenario is, it depends on whether or not you want your tie to be on the interior, like it is here, or on the outside, right? If you wanted it to be on the outside, just kind of showing you what I would do, you'll want to tie it down here and place it like this, okay? A really important thing you need to do is cut a hole for the ribbon to go through, okay? It just needs to be the length of the ribbon. You can totally do that if you would like to. I'm actually gonna make myself a longer one of these. I wasn't patient enough to count. So, let's see. I'm gonna put mine on the interior. That's usually what people do because it doesn't involve all the like measuring, making sure you have it lined up properly, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't mean I want you not to do that. You totally can. I'm just not gonna do it for the sake of time. So the next thing that you'll do is get out your glue. And we have enough glue cups now that we can take one home if we need to. Thank you, Jeff. And you're gonna get a little bit of glue here. You're also gonna wanna grab, and it can be reused if you want it to, but wax paper, kind of folded, doubled up. And you're going to glue the bottom half and then the top half. So you would go, bring the glue across the surface, then bring the glue up the surface. Until it's nice and even, okay? Then you'll lay it down more or less in the center. You wanna try and aim really well with this because the glue dries really fast. And then you wanna flip it over and make sure you don't have any weird little bubbles or anything like that. This one is small enough that I can just do this with my hands. If you have a big one, roughly this size. You might want to do it with one of the potter's ribs. Okay. Makes it sound like we killed a potter and took his ribs. Anyway, the next thing that you'll do is kind of, again, on this paper, I'm going to use a different part of it. You're going to glue the edge of the fabric. Okay. I'm going to get just a little bit of glue in there. And I'm just going to go down like this. It's not the end of the world if you get a little bit of glue on the interior, so don't feel like you have to be the most precise you've ever been in your life. It will eventually need to be glued anyway. It just will cause a little bit of annoyance for you as you proceed. And then again, you'll want to slowly fold this over. I use the back of my nail, as you can see, to kind of coax it into the bend and avoid any weird little bubbles or folds like that. Okay. I've also glued. I'm going to re-glue this edge because it's probably dry by now. Again, just shove your nail under it a bit. Encourage it to start standing up like it's a baby. And then smash down that edge. I'm not very distressed about little corners like this. They aren't bad practice. I am still going to go in and trim up the fraying here. So the fraying is something you care about, but having a tiny little bit of extrusion, this is a good example, like here, is not the end of the world. Okay. So, again, I will be going in to get the fraying in a little while, but right now I'm not too worried about it. Best practice with gluing, especially to make sure you don't get a ton of glue on the outside of your book, is to keep moving it across your paper. A really good thing to do is to keep folding the paper. Okay. Again, encourage this to kind of lay down. While I'm pushing in, right? So I'm not just pushing down, I'm pushing in, so that we, again, don't end up with any of those weird little air bubbles or any kind of unevenness on the edge. And then, let's see. Last little corner. If you notice really intense curves coming over the edge on all of your corners, or two of them, because there's only 4, and you want to eliminate that, something I would suggest to you is to just trim it before you glue the next corner. So just trim in a little bit. Okay. And there's my book cover. Yeah, thanks. I like the fabric. So, in this case, we do not need to stop and wait 30 minutes, right? Because we're not doing tons of things to this book, and we're not worried about any kind of headband or essentially any kind of stress on an already existing binding. That doesn't mean like cover it in glue, you know, but you can go straight into your next phase, actually, if you're ready.
Throw caution to the wind.
Right, just, this is a rodeo, right? So, I'm going to go ahead and tear down something to go on the interior. I'm getting rid of this little gross glue patch. I don't like it, and I don't want it. Oh, come on, behave yourself.
What's the name of that cutter?
rotary cutter.
Rotary cutter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Handheld rotary cutter, but
I was
yeah.
looking for one on a Blick.
I can send you a link for them, because these I think I bought on Blick. I
Okay.
definitely did, yes.